Thank you everybody for joining us today. I am thrilled to welcome my friend and colleague Kathryn Dicus to our webinar. And our goal today is to talk a little bit of Social Security, which is what you do all day, every day. But I'd love for you to take a minute just to introduce yourself and your practice and give us a little background on how you got started in this field.
Oh, of course. I went to law school in Villanova, and the first job I got out of law school was at an agency that did Social Security disability claims. Our primary referral source was long-term disability carriers. So I did Social Security representation for them for a while, and then I ended up moving out to Arizona because my husband loves spring training baseball. So we moved out here in 2007, and I worked as a government attorney doing public records and open meeting law and regulatory law. But during that whole time, because I enjoyed the client interaction, and I felt like it was meaningful for the individuals involved. So that was about 10 years. I did it part-time and on top of my full-time job. And then after that, I ended up going out on my own and doing it full-time from about 2016. So I opened the practice. I called it Dicus Disability because it's my maiden name, but since then, Social Security found out I got married and changed my legal name. So now my name is Kathryn Dicus Marquardt, but the firm's still named Dicus Disability. And over that time, I learned how to represent people in federal court. I've done Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals arguments. So I've represented folks from the beginning to the end. I do child disability. I've developed a lot of expertise with young adults in all of the areas that are relevant and important for parents that are trying to get their adults benefits between the ages of, typically I refer to a young adult as 18 to 27. That's when they know whether
We're
they're going
not
to
young
need
adults anymore.
disability. that's pretty much when they kind of, there's some disease processes like schizophrenia that the onset tends to be between 18 and 25, and sometimes there's some confusion about what the accurate diagnosis is. So I have quite a few clients that have developmental issues. I have quite a few clients that had emotional problems that where they've done a lot of trial and error, and their parents want to make some more long-term permanent plans for them.
Thank you. Perfect. I thought we'd start kind of simple. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's a lot of different types of Social Security, but a lot of families are familiar with the acronyms of SSI, Supplemental Security Income, and SSDI, Supplemental or Social Security Disability Insurance. But could you start by introducing us to kind of the broad categories of Social Security disability and what the primary differences are?
Yeah, there's some very important differences, and it's important that use the correct language because when you're speaking to folks at Social Security and you're speaking to people out in the wild, if you use the wrong term, it means very different things. So for SSDI, that's a Title II disability benefit. And SSDI traditionally is when somebody works and pays taxes on their earnings for 5 years, and they have to prove that they became disabled within the following 5 years. And the benefit amount is based on how much they paid on their wages. And they're also eligible for Medicare. So this can be accrued through part-time work and full-time work. So I have had clients that have worked part-time for several years. You don't have to pay in that much to get coverage for that year. However, if you don't pay in a lot, your benefit amount is not going to be a lot. But that's one tool. There's a second Title II benefit that is the disabled adult child benefit. And in order to be eligible for that benefit, you have to have a parent, a biological parent that, and I think adoptive parents work as well. And that parent has to either be on Social Security disability, Social Security retirement, or they have to have passed. They have to have paid in through their wages into Social Security. And the applicant, the person that is applying, has to prove that they became disabled between the ages of 18 and 22, and they continue to be disabled through the date of the decision. So they're both Title II benefits, and the main feature is that they are eligible for Medicare. So that's a big piece. Those two eligible for Medicare. The other benefit for folks that have never worked and never paid taxes on their wages is Supplemental Security Income. That's SSI. That's a Title 16 benefit. And the criteria for how sick you need to be is the same for all these programs. The definition of disability is the same for all these programs. So what makes SSI different is that they look at your household income, and they look at your resources. So you have to have, for a single individual, you can't have more than $2,000 in savings, unless it's in an excluded resource, which I'm sure we'll go over. And you have limitations on how much you can earn for wages, and over a certain amount, they reduce your monthly benefit by half. So if you make $100, you'll get $50 less in SSI. So, and the feature, the medical insurance with supplemental security income is Medicaid, which in Arizona is referred to as Access Health Insurance. It's the state administered health insurance. There are other benefits that apply to widows or widowers, but I don't think that community is represented in this call, so I'm not going to go over it.
Is it true that somebody might be receiving Social Security payments from different buckets, from both
Yes.
DI and SSI?
Yes. So the Title II, the SSDI and the SSDI and the Disabled Adult Child Benefit, that those payments come from a payment center. The SSI, the Title 16 benefit, those payments come from the field office. The field office issues those. So, and the field office is the one that you go into and you can get a Social Security card, you can talk to a person. They're the ones that actually issue the payment for SSI. So there's lots of different reasons why people might get payment from two sources. The primary reason is if their Title II benefit is lower than $950, SSI up to meet that $950.
Gotcha. So, it's hard to know where to start, but one of the things you mentioned was this idea of being determined disabled by Social Security, and for that criteria to be the same for these programs. Could you spend a little bit of time talking about what they define as disabled and what that looks like in terms of good evidence when you're making a claim?
Yes. So, and this is a very long question. So this might be the last question. Um, um, the there are a couple of different paths to meeting the definition of disability. The first path is called the listings. And on the website, or if you just run through Google Social Security listings, you will get to a page where it has in each category, physical, mental, digestive, all the different categories, neurological, musculoskeletal. It'll have the diagnosis and the testing that's required to meet or equal the listing. That's the harshest standard. And one mistake that a lot of people make is somewhere on Social Security's website, it has just a laundry list of diagnoses. So they will go to the website and say, oh, well, I have the diagnosis that's on this list. Why am I getting denied? Or why do I even have to answer questions? It's not about the diagnosis. It's about the severity of symptoms. So just because you have a diagnosis, that does not mean that you're going to win. The treatment notes have to have the severity of the symptoms, and going further, it has to show your functional impairment. For an adult, it has to show how that's going to limit you in a work context. And I think the biggest misconception is, well, isn't that obvious? Well, it's not. It might be obvious to us, but you're not going to win your case based on, isn't it obvious? Like, you have to have the explicit information. You have to have the medical opinions that are supportive, and you really have to approach the process as if you're going to lose and that you have to defend yourself. I think that is probably the hardest part for folks that have been struggling with an impairment over a long course of time and had lots of services, lots of treatment, and they're exhausted, and then they start this process, and it took a lot for them to start this process because they feel it's a concession or not what they had hoped to choose, and what they receive back is Social Security saying, well, we don't think it's that bad, we think you can work. So that, I think, is very devastating for people. So it's really important to approach the process like, I am going to have the documentation from a medical professional that reflects and supports every single thing I'm saying. Everything that I'm saying has to be in the medical record. It can't just be a statement from mom. It can't be, unless mom's a doctor, it can't be a statement from mom. I have lots of very well-meaning relatives that would like to assist their relative's case, and it's not going to persuade Social Security, unfortunately. So when you are applying, the best thing that, when you're thinking about applying, the best thing that you can do is maximizing your medical appointments. Figuring out what impairment, how it affects you, whatever diagnosis you have. Make sure that you're talking to your doctors about how severe your symptoms are. Make sure you're following doctor's advice. Make sure you are any improvement from medical treatment, that you're talking about the degree of improvement. And what you still can't do, even with this treatment, and if there's any side effects from the treatments. So fatigue, insomnia, irritability, all those things are really important. And, I've had plenty of people say, well, I'm taking these strong painkillers. Of course, they're going to make me tired. Everybody knows they make you tired. Well, it's important that it says in your treatment notes explicitly that you have reported that it makes you tired, or else it did not happen. If it's not in the treatment notes, it didn't happen. So the listings are one component of how you can get awarded disability. The other component, the other standard, is that you have to prove that your symptoms are so severe that you cannot perform any job that exists in the national economy. And that gets really tricky with younger adults. There's a couple of different ways that we attack that. If you go purely physical, you have to prove that you cannot do even a sedentary job. Even the easiest job out there that's sedentary, where you don't have a lot of interpersonal interaction with people, and that you do relatively a small range of work, assembly, something very simple. Mail, a lot of people, that's a common job, stocking. So I'm trying, I know a lot of your clients are younger individuals, and they don't always have that much wrong with them physically as far as sitting, standing, walking, right? They might be able to sit, stand, and walk, but they may have limitations in their bimanual dexterity. And almost all jobs require dexterity and coordination. So that is a really big thing that we emphasize if people have problems with dexterity and coordination. If you can get limits on handling, fingering, feeling. I talk to lots of young adults that still can't tie their shoes, can't do buttons, can't, wouldn't be able to sort mail, that kind of thing. The other thing, as far as physical problems that people have, if they have sensitivities, sometimes people have sensitivities to water, wetness, textures. That is something that we want to get good documentation from your doctor about.
Can I ask a question? Sorry to interrupt. But we talked a little bit, you talked about the listings and the medical and all of the documentation that's necessary. But for a lot of these same individuals, there's an initial diagnosis of autism, let's call it, or Down syndrome or something. And then a lot of times some of that primary treatment, if you will, or evaluation takes place in the school. Do those records count as medical, or how does that factor?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. If they count for child disability, a lot. If you're trying to get SSI for a person under 18, they carry a lot more weight. They accept a lot more different types of evidence for children than they do for adults. So, but if you are an adult, you would want to use IEPs. You would want to use any psychological evaluations. And it's very important that you are keeping copies of those records and not depending on the school or the provider, because over time, providers close, providers change names, and if that documentation is lost, it's gone forever. So if you are in a situation where your person may not meet the disabled adult child criteria until they're 40 years old, so they need to prove that they had they need to have the documentation from 18 to 22, and you can work with something that's 17, 16. You're not going to be able to work with something that's like 11 or 12, but you'll be able to work with something that's close to that age 18 if you get a favorable decision maker. So it is very important that after they turn 18, that you go back and revisit everything that you've tried before. So a lot of folks are exhausted, they're worn down, you know. We tried therapy, we had maximum improvement. We met with a neurologist 5 years ago. This is what they told us. I get it. I get you're exhausted. I get it's expensive. I get it's a lot of work. So security is going to want the medical documentation after age 18. So neuropsych exams, physical exams, physical therapy, occupational therapy. And if you get there and the therapist is like, you know, they're at maximum improvement, they're not going to get better than this, great. You know, you have that documentation, but they're going to want to see the recent documentation that's dated after age 18 regarding their functional capacity. I want to go over some of the mental limitations that I use for, because there's the physical piece, but there's also all of this mental criteria that's required for competitive work activity. You have to be able to respond appropriately to supervisors and coworkers. So if you have an individual that misunderstands conversations, verbal, nonverbal, if you have a person that can't control their reactions as far as being appropriate, responds with the wrong information, gets upset because they misunderstand the conversation, takes more time to learn things because you have to repeat them, demonstrate, encourage, redirect. That's all good documentation that impairs competitive activity. Also, their ability to manage themselves. If they need parental support to shower, brush their teeth correctly, keep the room clean, clean up after themselves. If they're an individual that needs a reminder to, you know, you didn't brush your teeth today, you have to brush your teeth. That's a deficiency in the ability to manage themselves. So you want to make sure that you're telling your providers, hey, they still need the support. I'm still reminding them, and have your doctors document that in their records so you can show the supported environment that they're in. If they're under guardianship or conservatorship, there's always a medical opinion underlying that action. And it's really important that you get copies of that and keep that for Social Security disability purposes, because that's very difficult for an attorney to get for you. That is not that guardianship or conservatorship attorney, because those are confidential records. And we can get them, but it's a lot of work and it might not work out. So you want to make sure for efficiency purposes that you have copies of any of those underlying medical opinions that support the guardianship or conservatorship. I had some other notes. Vocational rehab. If a person is engaged in the state services for vocational rehab, they do a functional capacity evaluation as part of that. If they have a job coach, all the documentation related to that can be used to show where they have limitations. The other work limitations that I find really helpful is their capacity to concentrate in noisy environments and crowded environments. If they are distracted or upset by the noise, by the crowds, those are things that are relevant to report. Let me think of if they need breaks. Unscheduled breaks are important too. If you have an individual that gets overwhelmed and has to leave the environment, go to their room because they're overwhelmed. Talking about that information with your doctors is important. When I have clients that I'm prepping for a hearing, I often say to mom or dad, if you gave your person a list of 10 items and drop them off at the grocery store and said, hey, I'm going to pick you up in a half hour, get these items, and I'll pick you up, what kind of problems would they have? Would they have any problems? Would they be able to ask for help? Would they be able to find the item? Would they be so upset if they couldn't find the item that they left? Would they know if they got the correct change? If there were strangers there that they started talking to, would they recognize any kind of dangers in the situation? Or would they just, a lot of times with folks with developmental disabilities, they are so ingrained and treated to be cooperative and trusting that they don't have that stranger danger anymore, and they will just go with whoever is around, because that's part of how that's an offshoot of their treatment to be cooperative. So you get a lot of good information that way. Sometimes I have folks that say, my person would be so anxious at just talking about doing that, that they would never even get out of the car because it would stress them so much. So those are the kinds of mental limitations that I try to draw out with young people to support that they need to be in an environment where they have a parental type person there, keeping an eye on them, and someone that knows about their deficiencies and can be flexible with them.
Can I ask a little bit about negative evidence? I don't know if that's the right way to phrase it, but I've talked to a lot of families who, as you've alluded to, right, our goals are independence and work in the most
Mm-hmm.
part. So a lot of times, maybe in high school or young adulthood, they arrange with a family friend who might have a business, or maybe they themselves have a business, or they volunteer and school. Like, how does Social Security look at those things, and how can somebody demonstrate that if perhaps they were successful in this one pocket, that doesn't broadly mean they are able to be successful?
Yeah, like they're gonna do pretty good at collecting carts at the grocery store because they went through 4 years of vocational rehab in high school, and they work part-time, and they don't have a full range of job duties. They just do the carts. They don't do the other jobs that are they don't do the other duties that are required for the full range of that grocery clerk position. So that the most negative thing is drug use. That's the most negative thing. Illegal drug use. The other negative thing is non-compliance.
If they see it in the records,
Yes.
you're not getting past it probably.
It's tough. It's tough to overcome. You can't overcome it in circumstances. You have to show a period of sobriety, but it is problematic. Non-compliance is also problematic when it's not an allowable excuse. So if the doctors say you should do X and you don't have a good explanation for why you don't want to do X, and good explanations are competing medical opinions, resources, financial resources, side effects, past failures of similar treatments. It's not because I'm scared. It's not because I don't want to take drugs. Those are allowable reasons for non-compliance. Also non-compliance because you don't understand how sick you are. So if you lack insight, if you are schizophrenic and you don't think you're sick, so you don't take your medication, and your doctors say he's, has poor insight and has good documentation of poor insight, then that's an allowable excuse for non-compliance. So things that I want to phrase it differently than bad evidence. I want to phrase it as things that Social Security will use to criticize you. Because I don't think working is bad evidence. I don't think volunteering is bad evidence. I think that that's good evidence if You can get statements from the employer, statements from the job coach, statements from the supervisor of the volunteer agency that discusses what you can, and you can do this through affidavits, that discusses how their performance is different than a full-time competitive employee, what accommodations they have, less hours, unscheduled breaks, reduced duties, whether this is the type of job that's typically performed by folks with disabilities at the grocery store. Again, there's lots of folks with disabilities. So whether they came in through a voc rehab program, because I have plenty of past clients where they did great. And this is how they accrue their own earnings record, is they did great in a part-time job or a full-time job with their family friend that was a supervisor. But once a different supervisor got hired, they completely could not cope with the change. So I think you can use those to your advantage, but yes, Social Security will say, well, you performed the job one time, why can't you do it now? What's the change in your medical position? So those are things that are going to be problematic, but I never advise people to forgo opportunities because there's no guarantee you're going to get awarded anyway. I mean, might get denied altogether, whether you work or not. So, you don't want to have the person miss opportunities for success that while they're waiting, 3 years for disability. I'm trying to think of what else is.
Well, you mentioned the substantial, right? Like it's not all 100 or 0, right? Somebody might be able to work a little bit. How do they define that, or what does that look like, whether it's SSI or SSDI?
If you go on their website, they have substantial gainful activity amounts, and for a non-blind individual, it's about $1,600 a month now, but it goes up every year by about $50. The other thing that is used against people is travel. That's a big one that's used against people, independently or with family. Where did you go? What did you do? If you traveled to Minnesota, did you go to a concert? What types of activities did you do while you traveled? Did you do it alone? Did you fly alone? Did you have any problems in the airplane? Travel is a big thing that judges get excited about. Sometimes, not so much lately, but childcare used to be a thing. If people have young children and they're the primary caretaker, that's something we have to explain. It used to be a bigger deal, but then the district court started really hammering them on, you didn't really flesh out what exactly they're doing with the children. So if an individual needs help at home with an activity, you want to make sure that is explained and fleshed out, either via medical records, or when you're going, somebody asks them if they have any children, you want to explain how your symptoms limit you, who helps you. I had one young guy, he was so nice, but he was developmentally disabled and had in his records that he was taking care of his horses. And as we got through the appeal process, he was able to his father was able to testify. We showed him how to take care of the horses, but at one point we did discover that he wasn't feeding them appropriately. He wasn't giving them enough food because he didn't understand the directions about the portion. So the horses were losing weight. They were actually impaired because he wasn't feeding them enough and didn't notice that they were losing weight. So it's an activity that was used to criticize him, but ended up being a good example of how he had a limitation in learning new tasks.
You've alluded to judges and appeals, but before we get there, do you mind talking a little bit about the application process itself and what that looks like or can look
So
like?
the first step is to file, is actually, you'd be surprised, is the hardest step, is to file the initial application. And it's hard because of the technical systems that Social Security uses. They have, every time they get a new database, they don't pay or can't afford to pay to migrate data. So they have like, multiple databases that, and if you, that have overlapping functions. So if you don't enter it properly in all the areas, you're going to have wrong information in there. So the first thing that you do is file an initial application, which includes a disability report, and which has doctor's information, appointments, medications, hospital information, etc. They typically go a year prior to, they want information a year prior to the date of disability, unless it's an impairment that where an old test is still relevant. So if you, I can't even think of one now, but if you have an impairment where you had some sort of testing, 10 years ago, and for that particular impairment, it's not going to change. That test is
That'd be
still
like
valid.
with genetic testing?
Yeah, something like that, or like some sort, like any kind of brain damage. The brain doesn't tend to heal, so something showing an impairment in your brain, or if you have deformities that the current records don't explain as well as the prior records. Most of the time, it's just because the current stuff doesn't reference it in a lot of detail. But if you have depression and it was diagnosed 10 years ago, you don't need to go back and get that diagnosis. They want to know how you're doing right now. So the initial application, and it's the disability report and like a 2 or 3 page, background information about who your mother's maiden name is, and just basic information. Nothing.
A format for doing that. Obviously, if they're working with somebody like you, obviously some of that will be part of that relationship. But if they're trying on their own, my understanding is you still could make an appointment of some sort to do that
You
with
can.
her.
You're gonna
Okay.
have to wait. You're gonna have to wait a while. You can. The best way to do it is online, so they have a good receipt of the information. But for disabled adult child benefits, you have to make a phone appointment. There's no online mechanism. And if you're doing SSI, you should probably make an appointment too, just to ensure it goes through. But make sure you're clear on the benefit you're applying for with that person on the phone. A lot of times they will fill out the wrong form. They think they're filling out an SSI application when you think you're filling out a disabled adult child application. And for folks that have somebody that is age 18 to 22, and they have a parent that is retired, disabled, or has passed, make sure they're filing SSI and disabled adult child benefits. A lot of the field offices will say, oh, your benefit amount with the disabled adult child benefit is higher, so don't file for SSI. But you don't know if you're going to be appealing that case past age 22. So if that case goes on past age 22, you want to have that option to get awarded the SSI while you're still appealing that case. So you can get paid on the SSI and that person can get benefits, they can get cash while you're fighting for the other benefit. I have a case like that now where the field office said, oh, well, the most is this disabled adult child benefit, and they never processed an SSI application. She had benefits based on her own record, her for part-time work, and because they were never processed, this is a 40-year-old woman, they said, well, there's no records between age 18 and age 22, and deny, rather than looking at the records now. And now we're 4 years into it. And they just hired me, where she could have been having that income, that health insurance this whole time. So there's the initial application. You get it filed by phone or online. There's several follow-up forms. They'll want you to do a medical authorization. They'll want you to do a work authorization, and you either get those forms in the mail and send them back, or they have the option to call you, and you just say, okay, that's fine. I give you permission, and they'll do an electronic authorization. Once you file all that paperwork, make sure you keep any electronic receipts, certified mail, write down the date and the person that you talked to, and have a diary, so that if they come back and say this never happened, you can say, oh, no, it did happen. I talked to this person on this date, and you have contemporaneous notes. After that happens, it's going to take 4 or 5 months before anybody looks at the case. So at a minimum. So, and once it gets assigned to a caseworker, they will send out function forms with activities of daily living, and they'll send out a work history report if the person has any work history. So the forms that they send out, you have to be very careful. They tell you that these forms are to help you. They are only used to elicit statements against interest. Do you have any pets? Do you help take care of your pets? Do you do anything socially? Do you have any hobbies? Everything you put on there that can be misconstrued will be misconstrued. So every question, you have to think to yourself, how do my symptoms limit my ability to do whatever this question is? And that's what you want to answer. I get lots of anxious people that they are so well-meaning and so well-intentioned. They're like, I want Social Security to know how overwhelmed I am. I'm so overwhelmed. I do all these things. And they write down all these activities. They write down, I go to medical appointments. I clean up the kitchen. They put down a million activities. That is the worst thing you can do for your case. The more activities you put down, the more you're likely you are going to be denied. With the exception, if you're doing activities as part of treatment, so if you're going to group therapy, if you're going to a life skills program, those are the activities that are going to help you. But if you're walking your dog, taking out the trash, talking to your brother and sister, helping with homework, anything you write down that shows any task completion is going to be used against you. Most people get denied on that initial application. The appeal is a request for reconsideration, which again is an easier online process. There's not as many forms to fill out. You don't need a basis. You don't need to say they were wrong because. You just say they're wrong, I'm still disabled. So you don't need to say a mistake. Unless something has changed, you always want to appeal. Don't give up, because the award rates are different at every level, and it does not correspond to the level. So people assume, I think reasonably, that the more you appeal, the harder it will get to win, and that's not accurate. The award rates are variable at every level. So the request for reconsideration is similar in a lot of ways to the initial application. You can do that 100% online. You don't need to call. You just fill out the online form until it says finish, save your receipt, and you're on your way. It's the same thing. You'll sit around until a caseworker is assigned. You'll know a caseworker is assigned because you'll probably get function forms. They may send you for an exam with one of Social Security's doctors. You got to show up for the exam. Don't take it too seriously. I have guidance information on my website if you want to go look at it. Things you can emphasize. You just want to emphasize how your symptoms limit your ability to do things. If you get denied at reconsideration, you file a request for a hearing, and that's when you go in front of a judge and make a presentation. The judge will ask you questions, your attorney will ask questions, and they have a person there that that will testify about how your symptoms impair your ability to work at different jobs. It's a vocational witness that typically specializes in some sort of vocational rehabilitation. If you get denied at the hearing, you request an appeal. It's called a request for review. It's a one-page appeal that you can file online, and it'll go to the appeals council. That takes over a year to get a decision. If you get denied at the appeals council, you have to find an attorney and file an appeal in district court. But the good part is that an attorney cannot charge until they win.
Tell us about your practice and how you support families through that process.
So it's 25% of whatever the back pay is if you win, and if you don't win, there's no fee.
I'm sorry, maybe I misspoke, but tell us about when you should get involved in the process and how you can.
From the beginning, the fee is the same regardless of when you hire somebody. So I'm going to charge 25% of the back pay if you hire me the day before the hearing, or if you hire me from the very beginning. So it's most of the time, especially with folks that have somebody that's pretty severely limited, it's hard for them to believe that they're not going to get awarded. So they typically hire me after the first denial. But it really does not benefit the person at all to wait. So yeah, I would say you might as well get the resources when you can, because it's not going to cost you anything different.
That's awesome. And just to be clear, you don't make up that fee. Social Security actually tells you what that fee is. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would charge a lot more if I was.
You're a good lawyer.
Yeah.
We've talked about a lot, and this probably could go on for a week, but I thought it would be helpful if you could kind of, first of all, for people who are here live, if they have questions, they can put it in Q&A and we'll address it. But could you kind of think of maybe 3 practical tips or big takeaways that you want to make sure people who have watched this, who are either in the middle of the process or are getting prepared to start the process, should be aware of, and kind of takeaways for them?
So the best thing that you can do for yourself is when you're in your medical appointments, before you even go to your medical appointments, you need to orient yourself and think, what do I want Social Security to know about why I can't work full time? And that's how you want your brain to be when you're walking into your appointments. And you want to be telling your doctor all of your symptoms and how they affect you functionally. And you want to think in your life, what are things that I do that I have trouble doing that would be good examples of why I would have trouble at a job? Do you take a nap in the afternoon because of medication side effects? Do you have you had to change the way you take a shower because you're so exhausted? You have to do it in steps. You have to do it less frequently. Have you had to change the way you read? Sometimes people can only read for a certain amount of time before they need to take a break. Um, have you changed the way you do laundry because of something related to your symptoms? So you want to think to yourself, what are some examples of things that I struggle with in taking care of myself and taking care of my environment, things that I avoid doing because of my symptoms? And you want to go into your appointments and think and tell your doctor, I have this list of symptoms, and the treatment that I've had, the medications, injections, therapies, they have helped me in this way or not helped me, but I still am having difficulty with these things. So that's how you want to really frame your appointments. And it's helpful to sit down and make a list in all those areas before the appointments, because what happens is you get in and the doctor's like, how have you been? You say, good. And that's the end. So, or they're like, do you do anything for the holidays? Yeah, I got together with my family. I went to Tucson. I did all these things. And that's all in your medical records. So that's the type of stuff that is going to get you denied. So that's really important that you kind of get your head straight before you walk into these appointments. If you're with if the person you're dealing with, if you're a support person, you cannot rely on them to, if you have a person that they're a poor historian of their symptoms and impairments, they lack insight, you need to be going to their appointments with them. Request the medical records. See what the medical records say. See what your doctors are writing down. You'd be surprised how many people get into this process and find out my doctor doesn't think there's anything wrong with me. I've been telling them how sick I am for all this time, and they're not writing down anything of what I'm telling. So request the medical records and make sure that they're accurately reporting the appointments, accurately reporting your symptoms, and have conversations with your doctors. If they're not cooperative, if they're not helping you, find somebody else that's more cooperative and is going to help you. The other thing is make sure that you're keeping good notes of your communications with Social Security. So if you call them on a certain day, make sure you're writing down the date, the time, who you spoke with, and preferably their extension. You want to really maximize any phone calls you have with Social Security for trackability. You want to make sure that you're writing down, their extension is the most important because it's very hard to get a hold of people. So if you have an extension, you can really shortcut things. But make sure at a minimum you're putting the date and time. You don't need notes of the conversation, but you could probably remember what you talked about. But you want to try the best you can to get a name and an extension. I'm working on a letter right now where, the person tried to appeal. We're past the appeal date, and now we have so we have to use all that documentation to say, look, she tried to appeal this several times, and she was given bad information, she was given wrong information. So those are probably the main things that I would tell people that are not represented and not receiving help, as far as putting them in a good position. And just don't be too cocky. Don't think that, oh, I'm definitely going to get awarded. There's no way anybody would ever see this person and think they could work. You would be surprised. I mean, I have people that spent a year in the hospital and they get denied. I'm like, how are you going to work if you're in the hospital? So it makes no sense. It's not a system that makes sense. So it's it, it's difficult to explain something um, that is nonsensical. But I try to tell people, I don't agree with them. I think you're disabled. I'm not going to tell you why they don't think you're disabled. I don't get it.
Talk to me a little bit about the intersection of incapacity, whether that's been found by a guardianship court and there is a guardian, and this idea of like representative payee and how a parent or sibling can help someone through the process and what that looks like during the application process.
During the application process, that is a really tricky
Like
question. So,
if I'm mom, can I do the application on my own for my child? My 18-year-old
so
child?
if you have a legal guardianship, I would say yes.
Okay.
If you do not have a legal guardianship, you would have to fill out what's called a 1696 form, which is the same form that an attorney fills out. There can only be one on file. So if you hire an attorney, mom can't fill out a 1696 form too. But if you don't have an attorney, you can fill out a 1696 form and get all the same access that the attorney has. But you would still need the applicant to do certain things that cannot be done. They don't let us do for the applicant.
And so then, but guardianship does not equate disability, right? We've kind of talked about
Correct.
but then moving forward, if the applicant is successful and they receive benefits, can you talk a little bit about what a representative payee is and what they do and how they get appointed?
So representative payees get appointed for lots of different reasons outside of guardianship. And it's purely discretionary by the field office. So when there's a guardianship in place, almost all the time the guardian has to, I think they have to do like a form or an interview with Social Security to get everything set up. And Social Security will explain the rules related to the representative payee. You have to spend the money in the person's interest. You can have a bank account in the representative payee's name that's titled a certain way, like for the benefit of the person. For SSI, I do believe there's some accounting rules. And it's very important to understand that if the representative payee makes a mistake that causes an overpayment, that's not an allowable excuse for Social Security. So if you have an SSI beneficiary and the representative payee holds on to over $2,000 and Social Security doesn't find out until a year later and says, hey, once you went over $2,000 in your bank, you owe us all those benefit payments back. You're going to owe those payments back. You can't say, well, I was confused. I didn't know, he wasn't even managing his own account. That's not an acceptable excuse. When it comes to folks that do not have a guardianship in place, it is fairly easy to get a representative payee set up. A lot of times Social Security will initiate it based on the impairment. If there's most often it's with some sort of mental impairment, mood instability, illegal drug use that triggers representative payee if there's any kind of history of illegal drug use. But I have plenty of folks that are bipolar and they spend when they're manic, so they need a representative payee. So the process is just a form, and and you have to do an interview. I think most of the time the field offices require an in-person interview. I had one client that was able to talk herself was able to get out of the representative payee interview. The field office has the discretion to say, okay, we don't think you need a representative payee. And if you get a supportive note from your doctor and you're able to convince Social Security, they won't require it and they'll pay you directly.
Okay. So thank you, first of all. Second of all, I have a few questions that people have entered here. One ties into this, and I think you've kind of answered it, but just to ask the question, it says, if I have full guardianship for the applicant, do I sign the application for SSI on their behalf? And does it need to be notarized? Is there...
It never, nothing needs to be notarized ever. Technically, yeah, the guardian can sign, guardian of so-and-so. But bear in mind, the staff at Social Security is inconsistent, not well trained. Would not shock me at all if they said, so and so needs to sign it. You can argue with them and say, I have a legal guardianship, they don't need to sign it. I generally tell my clients, just have the incapacitated person sign it, and you can sign it underneath on the fee agreement and it'll just go through smoother. But it's rather than deal with any kind of administrative hangups. But yeah, technically, the guardian can sign.
Okay. You mentioned when we were talking about the different types of disability and such listings, but there's also, my understanding is a list of certain diagnoses that kind of automatically qualify you or are automatically approved. Somebody asked, are the diagnoses that are automatically approved like certain stages of cancer, or are they specific cancers? Or can you talk just briefly about what that is?
So, it's interesting because it's called a compassionate allowance list. And even under the diagnoses, there is medical criteria that's more detailed than the diagnosis. For example, I think one of them is for dialysis, if somebody's on dialysis. But they have to be on some sort of chronic dialysis or dialysis for chronic end-stage kidney failure. Not just any dialysis will work. So there are those types of nuances, and they do. There are some references in the compassionate allowance list to just the general listings. So people do get confused about whether those full listings are also compassionate allowance diagnoses. So yeah, there's a small list of basically very serious impairments where you will have a shortened process, but short is still, I would say, 2 or 3 months. The only case that I thought was actually quick was ALS, because all you need is an ALS diagnosis. There's no criteria. So I had an ALS client and he literally got awarded and paid the following day.
Okay. Wow. Okay, I think there's one last question, and this is maybe something I'm supposed to answer, but I'm not sure that I can. So I'll just ask it and we'll talk about it. But our son went from SSI to SSDI as a disabled adult child on his father's record. Can I, who is his mother, legal guardian, and rep payee, also be in charge of his ABLE account? And it references a link that says, please be aware that the rep payee appointed by SSA may not be the same person who has signature authority over the beneficiary's ABLE account. So do you know the answer to that? Okay.
Yeah, so, I have the only thing I know about ABLE accounts is that they're excluded up to $100,000, and that there's limitations on the amount you can contribute per year, per tax year. Those are the only things I know about ABLE accounts.
And so to answer this question, what I think is the answer, but I don't know for certain, is it is an SSI rule, because SSI is the only one that cares about resources, right? So if somebody's moved into the DAC category, Social
Yeah,
Security is
that,
concerned about resources, so I think it's fine for the person who is the rep payee of a person receiving disabled adult child benefits to be the have signature authority on the ABLE account because the financial rules have changed. So
yeah. Well, is it an ABLE rule or is it a Social Security rule?
it's a Social Security rule.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I
I
think it's
mean,
SSI.
once you move over to the disabled adult child benefits or the Title II benefit based on the person's work record, they don't care about how much money you have after that. And that's something that people have a very hard time with. So as long as those benefit amounts are over $950, you're not going to be getting SSI. So you can be a millionaire. You can save as much as you want. You can
Pass around
inherit
all
money
this.
from you
Sorry.
can inherit money from all your relatives. You can do whatever you want. And their Social Security is not going to care as long as it's passive income. If you get passive income, it's fine. They only care about wages.
Okay. And I joked, but seriously, there may be other benefits you're receiving that do still care. Um,
Yeah.
Another question came in and says, once all is said and done and awarded, as the representative payee, are there any recommendations or resources that the payee can use to stay organized and prepared for any future audits of the account or expenses? Just keep everything
Wow.
documented. I mean, I think my reflection on that is, especially if you're the representative payee of somebody who is on or receiving SSI, there's two big things that I see trip folks up. One is this idea of in-kind support and maintenance. So this idea that somebody's not paying their proportional share of their shelter costs. And so if that's not happening, then SSI is going to reduce those. And to the point you made earlier is just being unbelievably hyper aware of all available resources, so that there's no time period in which that person has over $2,000 because they can go back and they can see everything. I don't know how they see it, but they see it.
Yeah, and that includes you can't add them to your accounts. I mean, that is a big, big thing. You would be surprised how many people add an SSI beneficiary to their account. It's a huge, huge problem, and I have stories where they were added to their mom's account so they could help manage their mom's money, but it wasn't their money. And then they signed an authorization for Social Security to pull their financial records, and all of a sudden they have an overpayment. So you cannot don't share accounts with an SSI recipient. They should have one account that so it's super easy to manage, and make sure you're paying their expenses out of that account first, and then if you want to pay for other stuff, it's fine, but don't pay their share of rent, don't pay their share of utilities, and but if you want to pay for their phone, if you want to pay for their food, Social Security is not going to care about that.
Yeah, and you still might see references to food and clothing as being something that will reduce SSI, but those rules have changed. So it's just
Yeah, thank
that
God.
shelter piece. Yeah, no kidding. Okay, well, I think
Yeah.
that answers all the live questions. Tell me, or tell us if somebody wants to work with you or see if it's a good fit or if it's something you're willing to take on. What's the best way to start that process with your team?
So you can call my office 480-809-6782 and follow the prompts to my assistant Erin. She does all the intake paperwork. She does typically a brief interview with some background information. And if I feel like there's enough to move forward, I send out packets. You can also text that number. You can email me at kathryndicus.gmail. You can fax me at the same phone number.
Carrier pigeon, something like that.
Yeah, I don't do in-person appointments. So if you want to see a person and come in their office, I am not the attorney for you. I appreciate you, but you can look at my picture on the website and we can talk on the phone. I don't get, as you can see, I'm super chatty. And if I did in-person appointments, we would be best friends, and I would never be able to pay my own bills.
That is very fair.
Yep.
Wonderful. Is there anything I haven't asked you that you feel like, gosh, I really need to say this?
Um, just, it's exhausting, it's frustrating, it's stressful, and it's a bad way to treat disabled people in our society. And don't take it personally. They don't they treat everybody equally bad. So don't feel bad, and don't give up. Be a pest, be relentless. You have to bug the crap out of them if you want to get anywhere, because otherwise you're going to miss out on benefits. So just make sure that you're taking care of yourself if you're helping somebody else. Don't let your own health deteriorate, and make sure that you are following up, confirming receipts, following up, make sure things are staying on track, talking to different people to make sure that you have an accurate understanding of the information that you have. And I have a lot of information on my website that you can just read over to get an idea of the process, frequently asked questions, how you can help win your case. Those are all going to give you a lot of background information if you want to kind of get started. Or a lot of people, especially parents that have kids with developmental problems, they start thinking about this stuff in high school. So, but it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to get all of the things in order that a person might be eligible for, and go to their medical treatment and comply with their medical treatment and eat appropriately and take care of your hygiene and make sure you're brushing your teeth and take care of yourself. And God forbid you have your own life. So yeah, it's exhausting and frustrating and stressful, and just try and know that going in. So I get a lot of people that are very devastated by that first denial.
Well, thank you so much. I've learned a lot and I appreciate all your time. And I will be sure to, of course, share your contact information. But thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you. Talk to you.
Bye.
Bye bye.